Hello everyone, I'm Colin Canet. Today I'm going to show you how you can make these gorgeous little bowls thanks to a note that I got from Jack in West Virginia. Let me explain. I received an email from Jack in West Virginia, and Jack's tip was that on the holes for the screws for the little catch-all bowls that he makes, he uses felt pads or cork pads. And we emailed back and forth because I wanted him to clarify when he was talking about the catch-all or nesting bowls, and he said yes, it was the video that I made many years ago, and it revived an interest in me that it's something that I'd forgotten that I'd done, and I thought, you know what, I'll bet you other people would be interested in this. It's been a long time since I've made these bowls, and it's time to redo the jig for it. So today I'm going to show you how to make this really versatile jig for the table saw so you could make neat little catch-all bowls like Jack, who's made 130 of these in the last couple of years. So let's have a look. Here's a very quick preview of some of the things that you can do. I've got a couple of spalted versions in front of me. This one is a couple of coats of Osmo, just a gorgeous representation. This one is a shellac coating. You can see it's a little bit more of a sheen to it. And back here I have some holly laminated between walnut, and that's some of the things that you can do with that. And this is an interesting one because this is actually a slice of a log, and you can see what you can do with that as well. And you will get some burning on these, so you'll have to do a little bit extra sanding. Okay, to get started today, I'm not going to cut any of the pieces. I've already pre-cut everything. I just don't want to waste people's time cutting wood. I think most of us already know how to cut square pieces of wood. So what is important is how this goes together and why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. Now, first of all, last time I made one of these jigs, I had a different table saw at the time, and I had a different fence, and that fence attached a little differently to this one, but most table saws do not have a lot of pressure. So if you want to pull up on a fence, most of them are pretty easy. And because this jig is a pull-up kind of a jig, I'm going a different path this time. Today I'm going to use magnets, what these call these switchable magnets. They're called mag switches, and I'm going to use those for a couple of reasons. First of all, because of the holding power, but also because we can move it around a little bit more freely if we want to do that. So let's get started, and the first thing I need to do is cut some holes. So I'll show you how to do that, how you can cut holes quickly and easily to accommodate these mag switches. Now that second hole, what I do for that is I just use one of my measuring bars and I move 3/8 of an inch out, and I'm just going to mark that on the wood, and that's the edge of where the second hole is going to be drilled. And that hole moved a tiny bit on me, but you can see how that just goes in like that. All right, I'm just going to go ahead off camera now and finish up the last one. I decided I wanted to make this jig more adjustable height-wise because when you're making these bowls, you might have different thicknesses of wood. So ideally, we want to be able to raise and lower the pin that goes into the wood. Now, my plan is to put a couple of bolts like this, and that way I can have the main part here, but if I want to raise it, I can put a filler in there so that I can raise that up, and there's enough room for these bolts to fit through. But what I'm going to do instead to lock them in, I'm going to use T-nuts. And so I'll put T-nuts on the top, and I'll put the bolt in from the bottom, and that way we'll be able to lock it and it'll be fully adjustable. So the next thing I need to do now, because these T-nuts need to be, I don't want them to be proud of the wood, so I'm going to have to countersink just a very little. Okay, good. Now, the next thing I'm going to do with those little, you can see those little pinholes on there. What I'm going to do is drill a hole straight through there because I want to mark the bottom here because I need to do another recess similar to these, but this time for the head. So there's my base there. You can see the two bolts sticking through. But before I get too far ahead of myself, what I need to do before I lock these bolts in here, I'm going to use this as a template because the parts that are going to help lift this up that are interchangeable, I'm going to use this as the template so that they'll just be able to drop down in. Now the last part, to lock these bolts, I like to use a little bit of CA glue. And I'm just going to run it. This is the thick. So I'm going to run it around the bead, around the threads, and it's going to get in sort of everywhere. I'm not going to use any accelerator on it. And it'll take a little while to dry because it's thick. But when it locks in there, it'll be nice and firm. Okay, I moved over to the workbench because that's where the air nailer is. And I want to glue these two little pieces on here to work as a guide. So I've marked them, or I've marked one of them anyway, and that's going to sit like that. And I just want to put a square on that to make sure that's square. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be gluing that, and I'm just going to use a couple of air nails on there just to hold that to speed things up for us here. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes and attach this hinge to the base here, and then the other part up on here, and then that will flip it up. Now the last part of the jig to put together is the pivoting pin that goes in here that will of course be the centering for the bowls. And what I've done in the past, I've typically just used a bolt and I put it through there and threaded up from the bottom. But what I found with that is after you've cut a few bowls, because you're spinning this on a template underneath, it starts to wear. The thread always starts to wear on wood. This is very hard on wood. So what I'm going to do this time, a little bit different, I've got this extra long bolt that I'm going to have to cut off, but what I'm going to do is put that through the wood like that, and I'll use a couple of nuts and washers to lock that down. Then I'm going to cut this off with my grinder and grind that smooth, and this will be able to spin on that template forever, and it won't wear the wood down. So I'm going to go ahead right now and just cut that off and drill that or grind that down a bit so that it's smooth, and then we'll just attach that on. So there's that jig already assembled, and you can see when I lock it, it's almost impossible to move that. And the thing that I like about this jig as opposed to the other one that attached to the fence, in this case I can actually take this jig and move it from side to side. So I can use it on this side of the blade or on this side of the blade. And I'm right-handed, and when I crank the blade up and down on my table saw, I always use my right hand. So it's foreign to me to use the blade the other way, because the way this works, we're going to be cranking the blade up into the wood. So for me, this is perfect. And whatever you do, you can switch it back and forth. You could even offset it if you wanted, because as long as that pin lines up with the blade and the arbor, that's all you need to worry about. So let's install the blade. In this case, we're using the wobble blade. Maybe you remember the video that I did a little while ago. We're going to put the wobble blade to more work today. So the way this is going to work, I've got my wobble blade installed in there, and basically what I'm going to do is crank the blade up into the wood. Now, before I get started, some people are going to feel that there's a certain amount of risk here. And you know what? There's a certain amount of risk with everything that we do in the woodworking shop. And if you do not feel comfortable with this process, you should not attempt it. Some people are not comfortable with routers. Some people are not comfortable with sliding miter saws. And this is just another tool that you need to be always careful with. So don't work beyond your means. Now the next thing I need to do is to make sure that this pin is right over the cross section of the blade this way and the arbor that way. And if you're off a little bit, it doesn't really matter. It just means that your bowl might have a little bit of a nub in the middle of it, which you can easily sand off. So I'm all ready to go, and I'm going to speed this video up here because it's a little bit tedious. The other thing to remind here, when you're finished, crank your blade all the way down, turn your saw off, and when it's all finished, that's the safest time that you can lift that all off. So let's turn the dust collector on and get started. And there it is, all ready for finishing. This spalted wood is just gorgeous for these little bowls. So you can see that I've cut diagonals, or not cut, but I've measured diagonal lines, 45-degree lines on all of these corners. And the only thing I have here is a straight edge piece of wood and a little bit of anti-skid material. And I've aligned the blade with just barely behind the edge of the L fence here. And all I need to do is align this straight board that I just ran through the planer to give me a nice straight edge with that diagonal line. And now it's a quick, easy way of cutting that off. And there's a quick, safe way of cutting those off. I'm a little bit long in there, so I might want to retrim that. But that's a way. You can see that I'm very close to the edge here on this one. So I'm going to go back and trim this up here. But now that you know how to do that, you can make yourself an L fence. What I want to take a minute to do is to show you what not to do. There's the chunks there. What you do not want to do on your table saw is to try and cut these off, running them through your, with your fence here and running them through like that. This is a high risk that something here could catch, and it's going to spin and it will throw that piece back at you. This is just too small to cut safely on the table saw like this. So, well, that concludes my video for today. So thanks, Jack, and thanks to everybody who emails me and keeps reminding me of stuff that I've done in the past, because very often it's time to revisit it. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.